Welcome to What Lies Ahead podcast. I'm your host, Chris Raffini. Please click and subscribe on all social media platforms. This episode's guest is Alex Dunne of Crime in Stereo, the Long Island hardcore band that's been breaking boundaries since the early 2000s. With albums like The Troubled Stateside, blending melodic elements, and gritty hardcore, they've built a strong following while influencing many bands in the scene today. This past year, they played various shows in the East, had a short run with the Movie Life and Head Automatica, while hitting the West Coast as well. Alex, what's going on, man? Thanks for coming on.
Hey, what's going on? Great to see you. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, of course, of course. We've known each other a long time. I'm going to say maybe mid '90s.
Yeah.
We'll go
Yeah.
back to going back to. I'm even thinking of your distance records, and you
Yeah.
helped put a
Yeah.
split 7-inch out with One for
Yeah.
One in us with Mike. So it's been a long time, and I'm going to say late '90s. You had the rookie lot. I would say around '98 or so. There was
Yeah.
the rookie
Yeah. It's
lot. You
probably
had a band.
98.
You always were at shows. We always went to shows together.
Yeah.
And then you blew it up from there with Crime and Stereo. So why don't we talk a little bit about your start in music, your first recollection of like interest in music, and then how it built from there, and then when you started going to shows.
I've always been into music as long as I can remember. I remember as like a little kid loving like being obsessed with Beastie Boys' License to Ill. And I had a White Snake cassette that I was obsessed with. And so I do remember always loving music. My dad was super into doo-wop, like 50s doo-wop, and my mom was like into the Rolling Stones. Um, the first the first show I was ever at was Gloria Estefan and the Miami Sound Machine
Ah.
at Jones Beach when I was like 4 years old or something like that, 5 years old. But I do remember, I mean, anybody that was is of a certain age that was around in the 90s, when there was like the BMX and skateboard scene were kind of in the same, whether you were a skateboarder or a BMX kid, that was kind of the same world. And through that, I started as a BMX kid, and this would have been when I was, in like late grade school, early middle school. And then through that, that got me into punk rock. And so when I was probably in like seventh grade or something like that, I got into Bad Religion and Avail and Minor Threat and Fugazi and Pennywise. And then it was also that same thing. It was from being in BMX and being into punk rock that eventually at a skate park in Levittown, somebody gave me a cassette that was the VOD still 7-inch on one side and the 25 to Life, like the demo 7, the one with short fuse on it, the 4-song 25 to Life one with short fuse. That was on the other side. And that was my first introduction to hardcore was getting handed this VOD 25 to Life tape. And
Mhm.
then my Overthrow, your band. So for your listeners, your band Overthrow really is the thing that got me into the scene in a tangible way. I think, there's a saying the word like scene is pejorative, however you use it. It sounds,
Mhm.
lame or whatever. But there is something legitimate to that, in that there's a difference between being a passive fan of music who just like listens to records in their headphones versus like being in the scene, for lack of a better term, where it's like a real tangible thing in the real physical world where you are like interacting with the world and with
Mhm.
community and meeting other people. And anyway, when I was in ninth grade, I took a music class in high school. There was a music elective. This goes to show just like how much things have changed even since the late 90s. Was that in my music class, they taught us how to splice reel to reel tapes. That's what happened in that class. Was they
Mhm.
literally like had old
That's
reel to
cool.
reel machines. Yeah,
Yeah.
and they would teach us how to splice them at like 45-degree angles and reconnect tape. And anyway, in that class, in my freshman year, um, music elective class, your bass player, Dan, was like 2 years older than me, and he was in the same class, and he was very scary and intimidating looking. He, like he was like the first death metal dude that I ever saw, and he had the crazy death metal logo, Cannibal Corpse stuff. And one day I wore, I think, like an Avail shirt to school, and he was just like, "Oh, you're into punk rock or whatever," and he was like, "Check out my band," and he handed me the Orange Overthrow demo.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And then,
I remember that one. Yeah.
and listen, what's crazy? That was the demo that started with the taxi driver
Was
quote,
that?
right?
I think so.
Like
Yes. Yes.
one day a real rain's gonna fall.
Oh, that was the blue one.
Okay, the blue.
That was
Okay,
the terrible follow-up one. Yeah.
I
So
I
yeah.
literally was calling people on the phone like a week ago because I saw Taxi Driver, and that scene like clicked a memory in my mind that I was like, holy shit, what old hardcore record was this? Like the sample from it, I was actually calling people, and then some Musili was like, it's the Overthrow demo.
That's funny.
Anyway, to finish my spiel here,
Mhm.
you guys had just started, you had the Orange demo, and that was my first show ever because nobody had ever, like I said, the kind of the difference between being like a listener and fan of music versus like being in the scene back then, like you didn't know about shows and you had to personally know somebody that
Yeah.
handed you a physical flyer and gave you directions and told you how to get there. And so Overthrow was opening at the Roxy in Huntington. It was a no redeeming social value, one for one, 25 to life show. And that was my first show ever because I met this like death metal dude in
Yeah.
a music class in my high school. And because I was into like a Veil and Bad Religion, I went to see you guys, and that was it. And I was a hardcore kid for the rest of my life.
Yeah. And but you and Mike too. I remember you always went
I met
from.
Mike at that show.
Oh, you did. I thought you.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
see, I thought you guys knew prior, but you met him at that show.
No,
Okay.
we both went to the same high school, and he was good friends with Dan, your bass player. For those who don't know, we're talking about Mike Musili,
Yeah.
the co-founder of Crime and Stereo.
Right.
Um, and yes, we both went to the same high school, didn't know each other, but he was also friends with Dan, and we met at that show
Okay.
and have been best friends ever since.
Yeah, and I remember you two. Well, after that, what I was saying was you guys you did a lot. You went to shows everywhere. You had that label running for a little distance
Yeah.
records, but then you started a band. You
Yep.
started the Rookie Lot that had like a lifetime-ish kind of sound from and
Hmm.
so how did that start? And then obviously that band led to a lot of other bands,
Yeah.
and then we'll go from there.
Yeah. So I was in a band in high school called the Rookie Lot. It was me, Brandon Riley from the Movie Life, and Brian Lane, Garrett Tierney, and Jesse Lacey from Brand New. But that was our high school. Obviously, before any of us did any of those things, that was our band in high school. Oh, you do Mark Scandato for this
Yes, he
podcast?
was the first episode. Yeah.
That's what I thought. Okay.
Hmm.
So this kind of goes to show about just like how weird things are and how, I don't, that's like I'm not like a new agey kind of person, but just like how sometimes things happen for a reason. So I was a really good student in school and I never failed a class my entire school career. When I was in 10th grade, I had a Spanish teacher that hated me, and I probably deserved it. Like I was a shithead. And she absolutely hated me. And at the end of the year, she gave me a 64, and which I like definitely did not earn. And she definitely did that to fuck with me. But she gave me a 64. And because of that, I had to go to summer school. So that was the only time in my entire life that I had to go to summer school. And that summer was the only year that in Levittown, where I grew up in on Long Island, there were three high schools in Levittown, and only that year, for whatever reason, they combined MacArthur High School and Division High School on the two opposite sides of Levittown. They combined them for one summer school. And on the first day of summer school, if you remember, the early run of Shutdown and Indecision t-shirts around this time, this would have been like 90 six or so, I guess, something like that. They were all this like heather gray. I don't know if you remember that. They all had like
Yes,
heather
I
gray
do.
t-shirts,
Hmm.
and the indecision ones had red ink on them, and the shutdown ones had
Mm.
blue ink on them. And on the very first day of summer school, I was wearing the shutdown shirt, and Brandon Riley, who went to the other high school in town, Division, was wearing the indecision shirt. And
Uh,
we were like, oh my God, like blah, blah, blah. and we met at summer school, the only time in my life that I've been in summer school, and which was the only year that they combined multiple schools in the district for that.
Crazy. Yeah.
And then from that, we decided to start this band whose sole intention was to rip off Lifetime. Jersey's Best Dancers had just come out,
Mhm.
and this sounds very just like blasé now because it's been 30 years, 25 years of every band in the world ripping off Lifetime. But at the time, it legitimately felt revolutionary because it was like nobody knows about this band. They're like this band
Mhm.
from Jersey, and some of the old heads know about them from Hello Bastards, but like no one our age knew of them or like had heard of them. And we were all obsessed with Jersey's Best Dancers. And that was the entire impetus for that band was like, we are going to start a band and try to rip off Jersey's Best Dancers. And lo and behold, Saves the Day was doing the exact same thing
Mhm.
at the same time, like in Jersey. So like our demo and the early Saves the Day demo were like at the same time. It seemed like everybody in the Northeast had the exact same idea that we all must rip off Lifetime to whatever extent possible.
Uh-huh. So then you guys started 98, I'm going to say maybe give or
Yeah,
take. Yeah, and you guys played. You did. I remember I think we played
yeah,
you a couple times. I remember seeing you guys a bunch of times and then it was a little short-lived obviously.
yeah.
And then you guys and that's is did it was it short-lived because the other guys you guys are like, all right, let's start different projects because then you got into Crime and Stereo and Mike and then other people started other bands.
Um, we just didn't, again, like we were actual children. We were 17 years old and we were
Mhm.
doing well and we didn't handle it well. And whatever, you know, it just kind of fell apart. Interestingly, we would have been like one of the very, very first bands to sign to Drive Through. Like Drive Through
Oh,
at the time, and this was before they blew up. This would have been like yeah, like early '98 or whatever. And they emailed Brian Lane and were like, "Oh my God, we got your demo. We heard the split 7-inch or whatever. Like, what are you guys doing? Can we sign you?" And he was like, "Oh, we just broke up like 2 weeks ago."
oh,
And
okay.
but that was anyway. That was high school, and then after high school, they all started doing their own things. The other dudes, so Brian, Jesse, and Garrett started brand new.
Right, right.
Brandon joined the Movie Life, so they had just done it. Movie Life existed already and had just done its go time. And then Brandon joined just as they were signing to Revelation and were about to do this time next year. And I went to college. And so out of like my whole crew of musician friends from around that era, my peers, like I was the only one that went to college. Those other dudes like literally hit the road at like 18. They just
Mm,
like started bands and like got shitty conversion vans and started touring. And by the time I graduated college, they were on MTV. They were,
yeah.
gigantic. Those 4 years, it was basically 2000 through 2003.
Mhm.
So it was like by the time I got out of college, um, Brand New was just putting out Deja, and Movie Life had just put out 40 Hour Train to Penn, and those guys were like on top of the world. And
Right.
then I started Crime and Stereo. I started Crime and Stereo my senior year, my junior year of college, and we got signed our senior year, my senior year of college,
Mhm.
and our debut record came out just a couple of months after I graduated college. And so it is interesting because like those guys, like the Brand New and Movie Life guys, the Glassjaw dudes, they are my peers in age, but our bands are not. So it's like Crime and Stereo is a full generation of band behind all of those other bands because again, by the time Crime and Stereo came out really in like 2004, Glassjaw and Movie Life and,
Yeah.
Brand New, they were like the biggest bands in America.
Mhm.
But it was cool. It was awesome. Those dudes hooked us up and we played the record release for Deja and Tindu. We played the record release for 40 Hour Train back to Penn.
Mhm.
And we did some of our earliest tours. Glassjaw took us out, and had us playing like when we were like just a thrashy hardcore band who like had never played in big venues. We had never played like with real sound systems or monitors or anything. And Glassjaw had us playing like House of Blues, size venues to 3,000 people and stuff. So it was rad. Those guys were all awesome in hooking us up. But yes, that's yeah.
Yeah. So it moved like I remember that with Crime and Stereo. It moved fast and it moved fast deservingly for you guys. You guys the first release you guys put out is awesome, So it really did and it caught on and you got those great tours. So that's what I kind of want to talk like a little bit about your style of Crime and Stereo because it's so great. You could put on all these different albums that you guys have, and they have all these different sounds. It could be straight in your face hardcore, like we were just talking about. Then you have melodic punk. There's post hardcore, and may I even like almost like moody alt rock in a way that Radiohead-ish in a way, and it just but sounds like Crime and Stereo all the time. So you guys have a deep, deep catalog. So and as you grow, you progress. Obviously, when you're writing. So what is your like in terms of writing? How do you guys go about that? Someone come in with something, and then you write over it, or is it a collaborative? It's always collaborative, but does someone
Yeah.
come in with an idea? How does that work?
Um, most things I'm gonna say, almost all of our stuff starts with me writing guitar stuff. That's
Mhm.
really I think the only way that I know how to do it. So it always starts with like a riff or
Right.
a part or whatever. And it honestly goes both ways. Like our last most recent album, House in Trance,
Mhm.
there's two songs on that record that are exactly the demos that I came in with, where like
Mhm.
I did the drums and did everything on my laptop, did all the bass and guitar parts and everything, and the versions that are on the album are literally like unchanged from what the demos were. And
That's
then there
cool.
are other songs that were chopped and screwed so ridiculously so many times that they have absolutely no resemblance to what the original intent or idea was.
Yeah.
I think as a band, we're lucky. We're all on the same page. I think we all have like a good feel for like what Crime and Stereo is and what we do and what our sound is. Um, but we're a good group, like in terms of like our mix of personalities and everything. I think everyone is dedicated to the best song, like
Mhm.
servicing the song. What is the best version of this song? And that is a lesson we had to learn. If you go back and listen to our first record, Explosives and the Will to Use Them, like there's so much, I think, like there's so much great stuff there. There's great riffs and there's great leads and there's great lyrics but it is everything all at once. Everyone is doing everything the entire time.
Mhm.
Christian is shouting and screaming and singing from the start of the song to the end of the song. And two guitars are like shredding riffs and shredding leads, and the drum is doing drum fills, and they're crashing cymbals. And it was just like maximalist sonically,
Mhm.
like everything is happening at once. And over time, you learn if you're lucky enough to like get a lot of experience recording, and like making records, you learn that like in order for the song to be the best version of the song, you have to pare back and you got to pick your spots, and I don't want to get hokey about it, but it's like that's what the great songs and group songwriters of all time, you have
Yeah.
to, they're not like bludgeoning you with things happening at all times. You got to kind of pick your spots. And so anyway, that's kind of our philosophy, is just what's the best version of the song? What does the song need? If it doesn't need a crazy drum fill in the verse while Christian's trying to sing, that's like, hey, let's scale that back. What's going
Right.
to be the best version of this thing? And yeah, over time, we've it's like, look, I know that there's like a thing, a book on us that like w- we have strayed from being a traditional hardcore. We started as a traditional hardcore band and then have like subsequently strayed from that. But it's not really accurate, like we always had the same goal, which was to see what we could do with hardcore, to like take hardcore as a starting point and see what else we could bring into it
Hmm.
and kind of I don't know, like I don't think that that's crazy because it's like all of the greatest hardcore bands in history have done the same thing. It's like Bad Brains wasn't doing exclusively traditional
Hmm.
hardcore, and Fugazi doesn't do exclusively traditional hardcore, and all of the best Minor Threat and Black Flag, like they all went these other ways, and so not that we are in any of those bands' company, but I just felt like that was a philosophy that I always vibed with, which is like, what can we do with this?
Well, that's what but I think that's what makes it great. And I like that each of one of your albums has some, I wouldn't say different sound, but there's songs that are different. Like you put Bicycles for Afghanistan on, and then you put like songs from House of Trance. It's like, but you could tell it's you guys. And when you write, um, from when you're making a sound, like you're not trying to do anything. It's just kind of naturally what is coming out, what you're creating at that time, right?
Yeah, like yeah, the last song on House and Trance, our newest record, the song Skells, is probably like the most out there sonically Crime and Stereo song that we've ever done. It's the first time we've ever put synths on a record on one of our songs. Um, but that was just like a song that I wrote.
It's got a cool vibe to it though. I love it.
Thanks. Yeah.
No, it does. Yeah.
So what I love about our band is that like that was a song that I demoed and had written and when we were checking out demos to do the new record, basically what happens is we all get together in a room and I bring my laptop and I play everybody all the stuff that I have, and everybody goes like feeling that, not feeling that, like, and we just kind of collaborate from there. And I played the instrumental version of Skells for the band and said like, check this out. I think this song is cool, but like this isn't a Crime and Stereo song. And I played it, and everyone in the room was like, "Oh, that's a Crime and Stereo song. Like
That's your answer, right?
yeah, like we can do that. We can crush this and make it work." And so that's how it ended up on the record. And I'm proud of that. I'm proud of the fact that as a band, as a hardcore band, that we can just be like, yeah, like we can do whatever. We can, we can make it work.
No, that's great that like you do that, and I think that's what makes it, as I was saying, with each album different, but in a way yours. Like,
Yeah.
it's you guys, and that's
Yeah.
that's what I think is great. So that's the thing, because you guys have put out a lot. You have a deep catalog, like I was saying. So you've had there's been various labels from Ridge Nine, Nitro, Blackout. You just obviously Pure Noise. Is that kind of an idea? Like it's you like kind of, well, some of the one off, but some that you don't kind of lock yourself in too long, or it just kind of works that way out at that time.
With labels, you mean? Or
Yeah,
with yeah.
labels.
Um, we got very lucky. We started on Blackout because there was kind of a connection there. We were really tight with the Kill Your Idols guys,
Yeah.
and they were on Blackout, and they had done the first H2O record, which was seminal for us, and they had Sheer Terror and Redemption 87 and Powerhouse and like all this stuff that we loved. It it wasn't great for us early on, but maybe also our expectations were unrealistic. I'm not sure that we understood what a label is and isn't supposed to do for you. I think when you're young, when you're very young, like we signed our first record deal when I was 21,
Yeah.
and I think you think that like, oh, we're signed, like now these guys are gonna make it happen for us. They're gonna
I
do
agree with you
all
with that.
this stuff for us, and they're gonna like make us blow up and whatever. And then when
Absolutely.
those things don't happen, you like blame them. And I do think that looking back on it, that there's probably like a great deal of that, of just like unrealistic expectations by kids. And then we were very lucky to get on Nitro, and that was Dexter from The Offspring.
Yeah, that's super cool. Yeah.
Signed us, yeah, and he was super cool. And unfortunately, while we were on the label, he made the decision to fold it into a hot sauce company. That he, I so he's a very cool dude, Dexter Holland. He is wealthy to the degree that is, I think, hard for people to wrap their head around. Like, even if you think of like, oh, like a punk rock millionaire, like a Fat Mike kind of guy. Like, yeah, I know these guys got money, but they're like, punk dudes or whatever. It's like when you sell 50 million records at before piracy, before downloads, when they cost 18.99 a piece, and you sell 50 million of them, and there's only like two guys in the band splitting royalties, like it's just money that you just can't kind of imagine.
Hmm.
And Nitro was sick for him for a while, all throughout the 90s. And honestly, I feel the vibe that I always got from it was that after AFI, it was like a crash for him, that he kind of like didn't recover from, like in terms of like the emotional high of how successful AFI was. Because he had AFI from day one,
Yeah.
from Very Proud of You, when they sounded like a totally, think about what that band did between Very Proud of You and Art of Drowning.
Yeah.
So in the 90s, he had Guttermouth when they were at their peak, and he had the Vandals and AFI. And by the end of that, I mean, AFI had sold over 1 million records on Nitro. This is like before they got to Interscope. Like they had sold over 1 million records on Nitro, and that was his baby. That label was his baby, and he was running it all throughout the 90s. And I think then after Art of Drowning, when AFI left to go to Interscope, and I do know this part for a fact, that he was like, all right, like the 90s era ended with AFI,
Mm.
and now we got to get a whole new crop of bands, and we got to like build it up again. And that was when they signed Crime and Stereo, No Trigger, Wilhelm Scream, Rufio, the Swellers. Like, truthfully, like they signed a sick crop of bands. So they went out and signed. I mean, whatever about us, but like the other bands were great and
Yeah.
amazing. They put out great records, and so he signed like half a dozen bands and was like, let's do it. Let's, like next wave, Nitro's next wave. And I just always got the impression that like then when confronted with what a slog it actually is trying to build up a baby band, or a roster of baby bands, or a stable of baby bands, thinking, hoping that one of them is going to be the next AFI. It's like, it's insane. Talk to
Yeah.
any indie label in America, in the world, and be like, how often do you get an AFI on your label? It's like never. It's one in a million. And I just always got the vibe that like the whole thing kind of like his thunder, his it's kind of stole his thunder a little bit. And
Okay.
then he decided to turn Nitro into a hot sauce company called Gringo Bandito, where
It's an
he was
interesting switch if you think about it, It's,
well,
it's yeah.
we
So,
used to, we honestly spent a lot of time hanging out at the Nitro place back in those days. It's in Huntington. They had this huge
cool.
warehouse in Huntington Beach, California, that stored all of Offspring's gear. They had enough gear to outfit Madison Square Garden. Like
Wow.
I am not kidding. The amount they had this must have been had a 30,000 square foot warehouse, 20,000
Wow.
square foot warehouse that was half Nitro and half just belonged to the Offspring. And they had their own recording studio. They had all this stuff. And the vibe out there was just like SoCal bro taco stands. Like we were always going to like burrito trucks and taco
Mm.
stands. And it had that like very SoCal, Mexicali, burritos on the beach kind of vibe. And I think that's how he got into the hot sauce. And at first, he was doing both. And then one day, they just were like, yeah, we're going to sell the whole Nitro catalog to like a catalog company, and he's just going to do hot sauce. And to their credit, they let every band out of their contract. So they
Oh,
didn't try to sell us off with everything. Like they then that's how we ended up on Bridge Nines. Was that Nitro was just like, hey, you guys are all good. Like they gave everyone their releases, and everybody got to go do their own thing. And we were again very extremely blessed to wind up on Bridge Nine. And Bridge Nine was amazing for us. And we
yeah.
were on Bridge Nine until we broke up. And then we were, largely defunct. We would play like shows here and there. We would play festivals here and there, but basically we really didn't do anything. We didn't do a real tour or release any music between 2010 and House and Trance in 2023. And then we were super lucky. and fortuitous to wind up with Pure Noise. We were on Run for Cover right at the very. We were one of the first ever releases on Run for Cover. We had a 7-inch with them. So our label history, you might look at it and it might seem like mercenary that like we were on all these different labels, but like we're shocked at how lucky we have been that like we got to work with all of the best labels in punk and hardcore, and they all kind of just like came to us at the exact right time that we needed something to happen for us.
Yeah, but you guys put in the work, you
Yeah,
did, and you
sure.
guys were good, and it was deserved too, And I remember seeing Small Skeletal at the time on MTV, and I'm like, this is awesome. Like I was just, yeah, like
Cool.
this is great. That song still, I love that song. I remember we were over the summer,
Yeah.
last summer, where you hit me up with something, and I'm like, yeah, I'm actually listening to Small Skeletal right now as you hit me up right now. So
Sick.
yeah, but yeah, you guys deserve that though. So
Thank
and
you. It was
yeah.
honestly the same thing with Bridge Nine, that Bridge Nine at a point, literally basically the same thing that happened to Nitro happened to Bridge Nine, that in the early 2000s they had American Nightmare and Mental and Terror and all these sick bands, and then by the mid to late aughts, all of those bands had either broken up or moved on, and they were looking for a new roster to kind of like re-spark what was going on at Bridge Nine. And the slate of bands that we got to be part of with that was unbelievable. When they signed us, Polar Bear Club, Ruiner, Strike Anywhere, Newfound Glory, H2O, Defeater, Ambitions. I know I'm forgetting people, but it was like that slate of bands was incredible. All these guys that they signed, and so like we got super lucky that we got to be part of that, and also Bridge Nine hadn't done anything like Crime and Stereo up to that point. It had all been kind of in the more you know the heavier kind of end of the spectrum of hardcore, and they hadn't done anything like us. And so when we signed, we were like the lightest band that Bridge Nine had ever done, and so we were lucky that they were willing to take a chance on us, and they were signing us off Troubled Stateside, which was still like a very fast
Mhm.
hardcore record. And when we handed in Is Dead, like they didn't blink. They
Mhm.
weren't bummed. Like they were stoked. It was
Yeah, that's
awesome.
good. So you guys, like I said before, you have a lot. You have a pretty impressive catalog. You have a lot of material to choose from, and you can't play everything live, obviously. So I know there's periods of time, like when you're talking about the Troubled Stateside when you were touring, and then the other albums that you had. You obviously have certain songs, but how do you guys now go about your set list? So like, and obviously it depends upon, like, you went out with Head Automatica,
Mhm.
but then you went last year out West Coast on your own. You got a show coming up soon. How do you guys structure your set list? And do you like, all right, we grab a few songs off of each album here, or it doesn't really work that way?
Yeah, honestly, I will try not to, but I could talk about this for 3 hours.
Oh,
I have so many set list thoughts. There is, you know, okay, so how do we do this? I was hoping with House in Trance that that's all we would be playing. That like when we put out this record, it's like, listen, we've been playing the same songs for 15 years, 17 years or whatever. Our feeling was like if you wanted to see Crime and Stereo play the Troubled Stateside and Is Dead songs, like you had 50 million opportunities to do so. We wanted to only be playing new stuff. Now, the reality of it also, though, is that I'm sure for most bands that are of older dudes, your new stuff is never going to be as, widely received as the stuff of when, people, when the fans are like between the ages of like 17 and 25, like those records stay with you forever. And then like you'll check in on the new stuff and you'll check out the new album, but anyway, when you go to play shows, there's a balance to be found with how much of this are we doing for us? How much of this are we doing for the fans, the people that came to see us? I totally subscribe to the philosophy that like artists should do what's right for them and do, what they want. But it's not like our fans are like, we're not Taylor Swift, so it's not like our fans are like uh the other end of some like commercial transaction that like we found these people through like commerce and like SEO optimization. It's like these are real people who love our band. And so we don't want to be like fuck these people, like it's about what we want. It's like I do have consideration for the people that love my band, and so I want them to play this. I want to play the songs that they want to hear and that people go off for. As a band, talk to anybody that's ever played in a band. The best feeling is when your songs are crushing live and everybody's going nuts and everybody's into it. And there's a million songs from our catalog that we could play where like we would be having so much fun performing these songs and like playing our instruments and doing this stuff that we love to do. But if the people aren't going to go off for them, that stuff feels great as well. And so you kind of have to find a balance. And
Right.
like, what is that balance? I don't know. It's easier when you are a headliner. So it's like if we're doing a headlining show and we're going to play for an hour, then it's
Yeah.
like, all right, let's mix this up. We'll have a block here of some chill guys, and this one's one for us. But then like we'll do a whole block here of like the jams that everybody wants to hear. But then when you're doing support stuff, and it's like, all right, you get a 8 song set or a 9 song set, and we have 5 albums plus to
It's
choose
tough.
from. It's tough, and then you start. I will tell you this, for example, one of the ways that we make the wrong mistake every time, every single time, is when we try to gauge some other band's crowd and what they're gonna want to hear. So it's like if we're doing support for somebody and we go like, oh, their fans are probably into this, and so we should play the songs from our catalog that suit the thing that we think these people want to hear. We have gotten it wrong probably every single time. It's like the one thing I can say is that is not the move to
Yeah.
try to assume what somebody else's crowd is going to want to hear from you, a band that they may or maybe don't know anything about.
I agree with that. Yeah, I agree with that. So what songs, and you have again, you have a lot of you have a you have a lot of albums, EPs and everything. What songs do you wish you would have played more?
Oh, definitely. So the my favorite song on House and Trance is the song Goliathet, which I think is one of the best songs we've ever written. That might be my favorite Crime and Stereo song. It's definitely in the top 5 or whatever, and we still have never played it live. So I'm very much looking forward to that. Prior to House and Trance, I would have said that the last song on our last album, I was trying to describe you to someone, the 2010 album that we put out and basically broke up immediately afterwards. The last song on that is called I Cannot Answer You Tonight. And that to me is the quintessential Crime and Stereo song. If I had to play one song for somebody who had never heard us, where they would get the feel for everything that we do, that is the song I would have given them. I feel like it's got all the pieces of what we do. It's got, it's like it's upbeat and it's a hardcore song and it's very energetic, but also it's got the spacey guitar sounds and you get the feel for Christian's vocal range for both his like hardcore kind of shouting and screaming, but also how good of an actual
Yeah,
singer
he's a good
he is.
singer. He's a really good singer. Mhm.
Yeah, so that one, I Cannot Answer You Tonight, Goliathet. I like I don't know. If you ask my bandmates, like they would definitely say I am always trying to play the ones that are fun for me as a musician to play, that are like good vibes on stage with like me and my 4 friends, and we are just playing music together. Those are the songs that I like to play, but again, it doesn't feel great if you play a gig and then everyone just stands there, and kind of like, especially like if the dynamic is the previous 4 songs, people have been like jumping on each other's heads and like stage diving and like going nuts. And then you play this thing that nobody cares about. It's not that everybody has to be physically moving for there to be a good crowd response to something, which is another part of it. Like you can play chill jams and have everybody really, really vibe out on it and have a great time. But also there are other songs you can play that are chill jams where everyone's just kind of standing there bored, waiting for this to get to the next thing. And it's hard. Sometimes it's hard. It's hard to tell, you know?
To pick, and especially like I said with you guys, you had we had one album, so and I can't
Yeah.
even imagine with you guys, and that's why it's like it's exciting having some new
Oh,
stuff for
I,
us coming that we could switch it up a little bit. But you guys have so
and you
much to choose from.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, you guys' new shit is amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm so stoked on it. I can give you a real actual example of this from recently. So we do a ton of stuff with the movie life because they're our best friends and we love those guys. But also we have the same drummer. We share a drummer, and move Vin Caruana is extremely busy. Is scheduled for a ton of stuff. He's got his solo stuff and movie life, and I Am the Avalanche. Rat, our drummer, is in Crime and Stereo and Movie Life and I Am the Avalanche. He has a slammed production schedule. Our guitar player, Gary, who is a producer, has a slammed production schedule. And anyway, the scheduling is very difficult and it's very hard to get everybody available. And so what happens a lot of times is that Movie Life will book something and then Brett will go, yo, these are the only 3 days that I am available for this like 7 month stretch. So it's like, if we also want to get some Crime and Stereo gigs in, should we team up and like, let's do some Movie Life Crime and Stereo gigs? He's a machine. He can play for, hours straight.
That was a
And
cool
so,
tour you guys went on
yeah,
the 5 days or whatever
exactly.
you did. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the logistical pragmatic reason why we team up for a lot of stuff. Anyway, in the States, Movie Life has a very sizable contingent of like hardcore kids, like people from our world. And even though they themselves were like a very big band in like the MTV emo pop punk explosion, of the early aughts, they were on MTV all the time and they were on Drive Through and they have that whole world. If you go play gigs with them or go to their shows in America, it's hardcore kids, It's kids stage diving and finger pointing and dancing and exactly what we would expect from like a band in our world and our scene. And so we went to England with them, us and them, earlier in about a year ago now, I guess. So early in 2024. And we were like, yeah, we're gonna play the jams that we normally would play or whatever. And at like the first show, we played like a lot of Troubled Stateside stuff, a lot of Is Dead stuff, a lot of like pretty upbeat, hardcore kind of jams. And we realized that like in England, their crowd is much more um like the people from the mainstream, like the people that got into them from like the emo explosion of the early aughts, from the alternative press TRL kind of segment of the world. And we would, if we and we played like fast ripping thrashy jams, and we just got like blank stares. And it's not like it's our first time in England. We go to England, like a million times we've been there, but this was our first time playing with Movie Life to their crowd in England. And it was just like, oh shit, like this is a different kind of tranche of people.
Mm.
And again, like by trying to predetermine what this imaginary group of people were going to want to hear, it turned out to just like not be the case. And and then you gotta, on the fly, you gotta be like, all right, tomorrow night's a different
And
set
make it do
list,
it.
change
Yeah,
it
so
up. Yeah.
it actually leads into right what I wanted to get into. So you guys obviously after 2000 toured a lot.
Yeah.
You were toured with some big bands too. How would you describe? You can't go. You're not going on full 1 2 month thing tours now. You're not doing that, but you're doing some. You're going to England. You did the West Coast thing last year. You had the little run with Head Automatica. What is touring like now as opposed to then? And what have you learned from back then?
Damn. I wish. I mean, yeah, I learned a trillion things. What it's like now as compared to back then. Now it is. totally stress and anxiety. I don't want to say totally stress free, but like when you're on the road and you're living on the road, the shit matters in a meaningful way to you because like it's your life. And when you're a young band on the road, you have to maintain staying on the road full time because if you can't stay on the road, then you go home and get jobs because you have to work when you're home. But then if everybody gets jobs, then you don't know if everybody's going to like be able to leave their jobs to go on the next tour when another tour comes up. And so if you want to like getting five, six guys or whatever all on the same page, like willing to dedicate their entire lives to this same thing of like we're doing this band and this is all we're doing and like school doesn't matter and our girlfriends don't matter and all career aspirations don't matter. It's very miraculous to get a band's worth of people on the same page and willing to do that. And then you kind of have to stay on the road. And then because of that, like I can just think back like again when we were in our early 20s, just like after every show being like, like what do we do in merch? It's like you're in the middle of nowhere and like you literally need enough money
Right.
to like for everybody to get like 99-cent chicken nuggets at Wendy's and put enough gas in the van. We slept in the van for years, to just to get to the next show. And so it becomes like, yo, what we get paid? How many paid at the door? And what we do in merch? And now that we're like adults with income, like real job income, and we're blessed and lucky enough to do this for fun, that stuff it's all gravy. It's all good. So I would love to say like that's a lesson I wish I could tell my younger self, but that doesn't, the reality is like my younger self we needed that money, we
Yeah.
needed that like, and again, also, the money now I have to say is crazy. What bands get paid now is bananas, just like fucking bananas. And back then, dude, we were getting paid 125 a night for years. Like for how long it took us to get to the point where we got like 350 for a show, like
Yeah.
$350. Like,
Like four or five guys in a band, right? You have
yes.
125. You're right.
Yeah, dude, like, and that was like it was like a good guarantee. You're not doing
Yeah.
door
Yeah.
deals. It's like, and we did that. Listen, how about this? I'll give you a real piece. You know what? I'll share this. I
Yeah.
will share this. You know what? I'm not going. I'm sorry to tease everyone in that. I'm not going to share this only because as I'm about to say it, I realize I can't remember the numbers specifically. So let me not share something that could be erroneous. But I will say, back in 2008 and 9 and 10, bands were drawing thousands of people, 2,000 people a night, 3,000 people a night. And like the support bands were getting paid nothing. Like in like the hundreds of dollars. Um,
So you play like I'm going to call it like date myself, but loved it like a Roseland kind of venue. You're opening that show. You're getting
oh,
$200.
totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. I bet when like Rancid headlined Roseland and this was like probably 2000 or so, 99, like when Rancid headlined Roseland and AFI did direct support, man, somebody's got to ask those guys, but I bet AFI did not get more than like $1,000
No.
at the most, for like a bit for like killing, a 3,000 cap room or whatever. Um, Bands got absolutely, and now like, dude, support bands, if you're in like a big tour doing 3,000 people a night with a high ticket price, like there are bands in support that are getting 25 grand a night, 30 grand a night or whatever in support, like not
Yeah.
even as headliners. Like, so it was just a different, I don't want to be like, back in my day, old guy, but like, yeah, man, it was different. We did the first couple of years on tour in not venues. Like in the hardcore scene back then, there weren't real venues. Like you had to like get to a certain point before you ever were on a stage with monitors. I cannot tell you how far into our career we were before we ever got a sound check. We didn't know what a sound check was. We didn't know how to do the first bunch of times the first time we ever got a sound check was opening up for Glassjaw because we're playing in their giant ass rooms. And I remember the front of house guy being like, "What do you want in your monitors? What do you want in your side fills?" And we did not have any idea what he was talking about because we had just been in VFWs and basements and catering halls for ever,
Forever.
yeah,
Yeah.
forever. So, and
I've
again,
been hearing Long Island thing like Deja One, Ground Zero. Love those places. That wasn't happening there.
no, yeah, like I would say for Crime and Stereo was on tour for basically 7 years straight. And for the first 3 years, we were only in basements and catering halls and all and places like that where Christian would blow out his voice every single night because he could not hear himself. And then by like year four, we finally like graduated into real venues and package tours and things like that. But it's like, I think if you're a band coming up now, I think that shit's a given. I think that bands like monitors and sound check and how to, having here's another thing, having your amps mic'd. We didn't know what that was. It was like you used to just turn your amp up loud enough that everyone in the room, all the way in the back of the room, would hear the guitars coming out of your amp. Like we didn't know about. I remember thinking like how insane that was. Like when a guy was like putting a microphone in front of my amp, and I'm like, this amp is on like nine. It's like how are you gonna make this louder? So yes, I don't know if I have any. Oh, you know what? Here's this. Here's advice for my younger self, or for um the people starting a band or whatever. I wish that I took greater care of the fact that there are so many people that are only going to meet you once,
Mm.
you know, and you're gonna play their city or their town one time, or maybe they're only gonna come to your show one time, or maybe they're only gonna talk to you one time. And I just wish that I was more cognizant of that and more respectful of other people's um like experience with me. Not that I was going around being a dick to everybody, but I do think that I was just very selfish and self-centered and like was in my own world and didn't kind of, was just kind of like wanted to keep to myself and be left alone and left by myself and didn't want to, whatever. And now I kind of look back at it and realize like how many people who I either maybe was a dick to or I blew them off or just was not cool to them. And then it's like, oh, that was that one person's only experience. And now we're still a band and we're still out there in the world. And I'm sure, are these people that it's like, if you were like, oh, you've ever heard of the band Crime and Stereo? And they're like, yeah, those guys are dicks. And it's like 20 years later, and it was because of one, and not that they would be wrong. Like maybe we were dicks in that moment, but it was like, it was one time. But it was the only time that we
Yeah.
ever interacted with that person. And then they're stuck with that forever. And as a fan, I know that that's true because I have my own experiences with that of like the one time I met a guy, and then if somebody still to this day like brings up a band and I'm like, oh man, I met the bass player once, he was such a dick. Or
Mhm.
conversely, like when you meet people and they're like the most incredible people ever and they tell the stories for the rest of their lives. I wish I was more aware of that and that I was more kind of respectful of the really just like how long time is,
Yeah.
and
I,
and
you
that.
know, I think it connects too with what you said before. How about think about what you were saying when you first started touring. You probably were so in the moment of like, how much merch, how much
Yeah.
this, you have to get to the next place. You're not almost, and I said this to like a few people that have been on here. It's like almost like you're not in the moment of what's going on. You're just thinking ahead, you're going on. So someone's coming to talk to you, doing this and that, not meaning it. You just almost don't have the time there and you're not meaning to do that. So it's like almost now it's like it's more appreciative of what's going on now. Like with these,
But
right?
let me
Right?
give you, yeah, let me give you reverse examples
Yeah.
about people doing it the other way and
Mhm.
how I still think about this to this day. The first time we ever toured England was opening for Sick of It All. We were like super lucky. Sick of It All took us to the UK, and that was the first time that we were ever in the UK. And this is, Sick of It All's gigantic. This was
Yes.
2006 or something like
Yeah.
that, 2007. Sick of It All is my all-time favorite hardcore
Me
band.
too.
They're the best New York hardcore band of all
Me
time,
too.
hands down. I don't even think it's a conversation. Um, and dude, when I tell you they would finish playing, they do a major headlining set. They're playing for an hour and 20 minutes or whatever. And when they finished playing, the other dudes, everybody's sweaty and, like drained and everything. And Armand and Craig and Pete would, like wave to the crowd and they would step off stage and start slamming waters and trying to catch their breath or whatever. And Lou Kohler would go jump over the barricade and
Hmm.
go down to the floor and would shake hands and talk to every single person that was there that wanted to talk to him, and he did it every night. And I remember there was one night we were in like Newcastle, and it was a small club. It was like, a really small club. And so it almost had like a bar vibe. And afterwards, he goes to talk to everybody, but now everybody's like near the bar, and so they're hanging out and drinking, and everybody from the show is like still there. And now people are coming over and talking to him or whatever. And we go back and we're, selling merch and doing our thing and breaking down gear or whatever. And I went out, I swear to God, 2 hours later, and
Still there.
he is still there. He never even got a minute to like go backstage and change out of his sweaty t-shirt or whatever. It's like he was still there 2 hours later talking to just every single person. And I just think about the amount of goodwill that brings into the world to be. I mean, he deserves it. That's not a front for him, like that is who he is. It's not like he was um kind of Machiavellian being like, I'm gonna do this so later people say good things about me. It's like he sincerely just was compelled to do that. But then you think about like a lifetime that guy has had, a lifetime
Of
of
doing
going around the world, and there's just all of these millions of people who were like, "Oh, that's the best guy I ever met."
it. Yeah.
It's like, think about that. Think about there being like a million people in the world who were like, "I met that guy and I hung out with him and I talked to him and he was the fucking coolest guy that I ever met." And if I could have had one thing back, I would love a second opportunity to engender goodwill
Yeah.
like that to that degree.
Mhm.
I regret that I wasn't mature enough at the time to recognize that that is a thing that I would have cared about.
Mhm. Yeah, and that stuff's important, like you said. It's all about right. It's being in the moment. It's when you're younger, you're just worrying about a lot of the other things, and these other things are not. It's not
Yeah.
like important to you, even though you're like, all right, next place, kind of thing. Couple more questions, and then we'll
Yeah.
do. Then I'll ask you. We'll end off with like a bunch of like rapid fire kind of questions.
Oh yeah.
So, what I want one thing I wanted to end with. Well, one of the two questions is so for Crime and Stereo, what's in the future for you guys? Look, I know you got some shows, there's shows going on, but any plans in the summer or moving forward in the spring? Any new music? I
Yeah.
know House of Trance is, it's about 2 years old now, but still
Yeah.
wondering.
Yeah. Well, I'm dying to get the next record out. And so the same thing, like we're waiting for everybody's schedules to open up. Our drummer Brett just did like three back-to-back big, right? He did that Anxious record, Bambi, that just came out. He produced that. He did the new Heart Attack Man record, and now he's just finishing up, I think, like a 2 month session to do the new Hot Mulligan record. And so he's been real like on like a recording bender where he hasn't been available for at any time. So now his schedule, I believe, is opening up, and we are about to start diving in on the next record.
Great.
And I'm very excited. We want to keep it going for as long as we can, for as long as anybody cares, for as long as anybody is willing to put out our records, and hopefully people want to hear our records. And House and Trance was like so rejuvenating for all of us. Like
Yeah.
everybody had such a great time doing it, and we're so proud of it. And we're really, really now excited to do the next one. And kind of every record you do, when you finish it, you go, "Oh, like we're very happy with it, and we're very proud of it." But now I can see like X, Y, and Z. we could have done X, Y, and Z. We should have
Always,
done A,
right?
B, and
Yeah.
C. And so like it just gets you amped up to dive into the next one. We want to play as many shows as possible. I got to tell you, like you talk about before, like what's a major difference between now and then? The time frame in which things happen now is unbelievable. Like shows are all booked. I don't know if if a little like behind the scenes info here for people that don't know. It's like shows are booked a year in advance now.
Yeah.
All of these festivals are a year in advance. If there are festivals happening in September and October of a given year, they are already booked and set in stone by the previous September, October.
Hmm.
And so as people now who like crime and stereo isn't we have kids, we're married, we have jobs, like it it's not anybody's number one, priority in terms of like your day-to-day life. And so a lot of times what happens is we'll then all of a sudden realize like, oh, everybody's got this week off
Hmm.
in June or whatever, and like let's get something going. And then we talk to like the agents and promoters and they're like, oh, June was booked 4 months ago. Like if you guys got to get in now for next June. So we're trying to be just more on top of the ball and more proactive with things like that. And it was the same thing with House and Trance. Like we handed in House and Trance in late March, I want to say, and it came out in late October.
Hmm.
So it's like even when you hand in, and a lot of that has to do with vinyl pressing times. It's like even when you hand in an album, you're looking at it coming out probably 8 or 9 months later or something like that. So everything's on like a crazy timeline where we're like, all right, we got to get this thing written because then we got to get it recorded and then we got to do it. We'll take longer to get artwork done than we will to get a record done. Not because we're being meticulous about our artwork, but because like that's just not things that aren't your thing. Then you just you're like, we're doing the music like somebody else
Right.
figure out what the cover is going to be or whatever. So by the time they want everything. So but when you hand it in, it's got to be fully mastered, all artwork done. You already got to be working on what the videos or the visualizers and like all of these things. And so we want to get on it so that it can come out hopefully not a million years from now.
Great. And what the stuff you've been working on and you have, is it same vein as House and Trance or
Yes, I'm honestly very proud of House and Trance. I think
good
it's
one? It is.
probably, yeah, like I'm really proud of it. My only takeaway, my only beef, if I have one with the album, is that record was written mostly during the pandemic. Those are all songs that I wrote, demoed on my laptop during the pandemic. And my goal for the record was that I wanted it to be high energy. I wanted the whole thing to be like, with the exception of like one or two tracks, I wanted it to be mostly really high energy. And when we wrote it and demoed it and started doing pre-production on it, like it really did feel like that's what we had. And then when we put the record out and got back into playing shows, then when you're in like a sweaty room with sick, awesome hardcore bands playing and opening and kids are flying around, and I realized that like the songs are songs that appear to be high energy when you haven't left your own bedroom for 2 years. Like not that they're low energy, but there is a difference between like when you are in the room, and this, it's like when you're
Mhm.
in the room at a hardcore show and the energy is there, it's a different level.
Yeah.
And so like to me, when we recorded House and Trance, I was like, oh, this record like rips in terms of like energy and kinetic, feel. Um, and now having spent a year in rooms playing it, I'm like, it's a little more chill than I thought at the time. It's high energy for a pandemic bedroom. It's not high energy for a sweaty hardcore show. And that's not a knock on the record. It's more just an acknowledgement of like that I didn't fully hit the mark. We didn't fully hit the mark on maybe what we were setting out to do. And so for the next one, that's kind of like what I have top of mind of like, okay, all the same stuff and same things we were going for, but like now I feel like I have a better feel for what kind of kineticism I'm really after.
It's great. Excited to hear it. It's gonna looking forward to that. So I guess we'll end here with this question. We started talking in the beginning of where you came from, your roots, meeting Mike Usilli, I think at the Roxy, and
Yeah, yeah.
well, we'll talk a little about House of Commons, right? There's you have
Oh
that
yeah.
label going a little, which is awesome. So talk a little bit about that.
Yes, it's still we have not like hard launched this label, but we will soon. We will shortly. Me and my best friend Mike, been best friends our whole lives, have a label called House of Commons, and it started in like 1997 with your band. When we were in high school, we had a record label called Distance Records, and we made the label to put out an Overthrow 1-for-1 7-inch, which we recorded and did. And what happened was we spent all of our money pressing the records, and we didn't have any money left over to do the packaging, to do like the inserts and the sleeves and everything. And we were able to maybe do a couple of hundred, but we had like 1,000 records pressed. And that was it. That was the short-lived shelf life of
And I
Distance.
remember with Distance, you had other ones planned, right? You had
The
Sullivan's
one
band,
step,
One Day Closer.
the one day closer was going to be the second thing, which we paid to have recorded, and then
Yeah,
didn't have enough money to press. We literally were like two high school kids. Like we didn't,
yeah. I
our
mean,
parents didn't have money. Like we didn't. We were
what do you
doing this
make
like
lucky $5 an hour at that point in time if you're lucky, right?
exactly.
Yeah, and it was
So
expensive to do that then.
yes, it was very short-sighted. We didn't know what we were doing. So now we are going to bring it. We have brought it back. Our first thing was we did a variation of the Standstill
Yeah,
full length that's on Days.
not cool.
And then we did a variation of the Prime and Stereo first record that came on Explosives and the Will to Use Them that was pressed to vinyl for the first time. So there's a House of Commons variant for that. We're going to do a variant for the Time Heist record that's coming out on Indecision. They're a straight edge band from Denver that are great friends of ours that we love. And we are going to release, though, we're going to finally, for the first time ever, release the fabled Overthrow 1-for-1 split 7-inch, and we're gonna get it out there into the world.
Cool.
I think 1-for-1 is maybe the most underrated
I would agree.
Northeast hardcore band of all time. The
They
fact
were
that,
great. I love them. They were great. I speak
dude,
about it past tense. I still do, but yeah, the In
it
Search of is such a great album. I even like the stuff they did after on Triple Crown, the metal stuff. It was good.
yeah, the Triple Crown one was
But
okay.
In Search of is
The 7-inch, the I
classic.
Won't Lose 7-inch, In Search of full length is fucking bananas good.
Yep.
And then the Time Served EP on Kev One's label that
Yeah.
came out after that, that's amazing too. Their riffs are so. I mean, dude, it's fucked up. As like I'm sure you can relate. Like being an old guy in hardcore and looking back and seeing these bands that just didn't make the longevity. Like so much luck goes into what bands get passed on to the next generation,
Yeah.
and to see what bands it happens for and what bands it doesn't, and the kind of capriciousness of how these things occur, and then to be like an old guy and look back on some of these bands from like 20 years ago or 25 years ago and be like, damn, they didn't make it. Like the new heads don't know about these guys, and like 1-for-1 and By the Grace of God,
Yeah.
and just like all of these incredible bands from our generation. It blows my mind that Modern Life is War
Hmm.
isn't doing 3,000 people a night, to like and again, like they do well, they do fine. They're still an amazing band, but it's like certain bands get like passed on forward to the next generation and others don't. From the NYHC bands of our generation, it's like Gorilla Biscuits and Madball
Yeah.
became like the ones that like every generation of kids like still kind of like latch onto. And then there are these other bands like AF and Sick of It All or whatever that you don't nearly hear. They became kind of like old guy bands, which is
Mhm.
weird. It's like the
Yeah.
young kids are like way stoked on Gorilla Biscuits and Madball. I don't know if they care about an Agnostic Front show. And again, if you would ask me or you or any hardcore person in like the 90s or whatever, like,
Kings. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
so it's a very strange thing to see, and I would love to have any part possible in getting some young kids to know about Overthrow and One for One.
Yeah, cool. That'd be cool. It's psyched they're putting that back out. That's going to
Yeah,
be
man.
good. You know.
Yeah.
All right. So I guess we'll end here, Alex, with questions I'll ask you. First things that come to mind. So, what are your top three favorite albums of all time? Doesn't have to be hardcore.
Jesus. Wow. Top three. I can't do favorite because my favorites are always going in and out. I can say the most consequential records of my life are Bad Religion, Stranger Than Fiction. That is the record that solidified me to a life in punk rock. Was discovering Bad Religion and Silent Majority's Life of a Spectator, which was the record that kind of solidified, crystallized the young portion of my life and what it meant
Mhm.
to be a Long Island hardcore kid in the 90s. That I feel like, and again, like same thing, like Silent Majority wasn't actually the biggest band of our generation on Long Island at the time. They were up there, but it's like there were a bunch of bands that from Long
Yeah.
Island. Tripface was huge, Indecision was huge. The Tension was huge. Like there was a million bands that did really well, but I think that record is the record that encapsulated for everyone what it felt like to be a Long Island hardcore kid in the
Mhm.
golden era.
Yeah.
And then I would say third is probably Lifetime Jersey's Best Dancers because that is the record that as a musician I got my sound from. My whole sound really just was nothing more than trying to do Lifetime. My riffs are still based foundationally in me trying to steal Dan Yeeman's style and rip off Yeeman riffs. And so much of that has bled into my DNA as a musician that there's really no getting it out. There's no way of ever getting away from it. So I think everything that I do for the rest of my life musically will be colored by Lifetime in some way.
Cool. Yeah, and that's great. Because it is. The fact that that meaning great, meaning that it's obviously influential to you. Because still to this day, you're talking about what it means to you. What's your favorite tour for Crime and Stereo of all time?
The most fun two tours. The first tour we ever did out to the West Coast, the first time we made it out to California, and that was when we became friends with the Lifelong Tragedy and Set Your Goals. So these two California bands who we kind of became our brother bands for our whole existence. Our first California show ever was Set Your Goals' first show ever.
Oh,
So their first ever show was opening the first time we ever played a show in California at the Danville Grange Hall. And then the Lifelong Tragedy guys from Petaluma in the Bay Area became our best friends and our best band buds. So the first time we did a full US tour, and then in 2008 we spent like almost a month in Australia with Against Me, and it was when Against Me was at their peak. They had just
wow.
put out New Wave. They were doing like
Yeah.
the world tour for New Wave, and they had just come off an arena tour opening up for Foo Fighters. So it was like we met them in Sydney, and their last show before they met us in Sydney was Madison Square Garden with Foo Fighters and Jimmy Eat World. And so they like went that like they were in their most kind of rock star moment where everything was happening for them. And then we spent like 3.5 weeks in Australia with them. We went to every city in Australia. We're in Tasmania. We were flying from show to show. We're taking
Cool.
planes from show to show. And that was probably the craziest. That was also peak Crime and Stereo being like extremely out of pocket. And we were not well behaved. That was probably like that was peak Crime and Stereo wiling out was like that month in Australia.
That was fun. All right, so kind of mentioned House and Trance with this one, but what's the album for Crime and Stereo that you're most proud of? You're like, all right, we nailed it on this one.
Probably Troubled Stateside. I would say between Troubled Stateside and House and Trance, but I would give it to Troubled Stateside. There is nothing that I would change about that record. There's nothing that I'm not happy with. There's nothing that even like literally like little thing there's like when you're in a band and you know this, it's like you will nitpick minutia for the rest of your life, things that no one will ever hear or listen to. So it's like on House and Trance, when if you ask me like, is it a perfect record? I'd be like, nah, there's like this one lyric that I don't love, like there's like one line that I don't love or something like that. And on Troubled Stateside, I don't believe there's anything. I don't think there's a moment
That's
that
my favorite
I
Crime and
would change.
Stereo record, even though I'm asking you, but I'll
Yeah,
just.
yeah, yeah.
So let's go old Long Island venues or whatever
Okay.
you call them. Dr. Shays or Ground Zero?
Damn. For what is the metric by which we're gauging these? Um, ground. I would say Dr. Shays. Dr. Shays has the juice, man. I saw some fucking. Speaking of out of pocket shit, it's fun. It's so funny, man. Seeing now there's this resurgence in the kind of Queens beatdown bands from
Mhm.
our era. They're like very popular now. I know like Everybody Gets Hurt, kids
Yeah.
are mad into, and I'll hear kids talk about Irate and these kind of bands. And I hear, the kids to like speak about them with like enthusiasm, like, man, I wish I was there back in the day. And I'm like, man, I don't know that you do. Like, I don't think you know what like an Irate show at Dr. Shays looked like,
It
man.
was like a
Like,
war zone.
yeah,
It was, yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Like
The
grown
place
ass,
was
like
so small. It was
yeah, and these
always
dudes were like
packed. That place, yeah.
construction workers, It's like these like 260 pound like dudes that work construction, like knocking kids' heads off. I'm glad, dude, same thing. Like I used to go see Overthrow at the pipeline in New Jersey with E-Town Concrete and
Mhm.
NJ Bloodline. And again, that they're like there's this nostalgic thing I think from young kids about how like they wish they were around from that stuff. And it's like I look back on those shows and I'm like, yo, I was terrified. As like a skinny, dorky, like 17-year-old like emo kid or whatever. It's like I wasn't a big dude. And those shows were fucking terrifying. Dr. Shays was terrifying. Ground
Yeah,
Zero was fine.
but yeah.
When I think of
PWAC,
Dr. Shays, I think of like Relentless,
yeah,
like that.
Perception,
Yes,
yeah,
Perception,
and
exactly.
then
Like,
like, and then we get One for One, Shutdown, and like
yeah,
and E Town played there,
I know.
and
Dude,
shit,
I
Tyler and
came
Kill Your Idols played there. I remember
totally.
too.
Yeah, everybody,
A cool
everybody did.
spot.
Hell yeah.
PWAC or Deja One?
Oh, PWAC. I mean,
PWAC.
listen, Deja One had a better. That's really tough. They are the two most important seminal Long Island venues in Long Island history.
True.
PWAC was a type of magic that if you were not there, you could not imagine. If you weren't
Right.
there at that time in his, and again, I really don't mean to be like old guy back in my day kind of stuff, but kids now, I can hear how much of a lame old ass dork I sound like saying this, but VOD and Madball and H2O and these bands, it's like VOD was drawing 2,000 people
2,000 people. It was
to an
insane.
illegal warehouse. Like it's like
It's, you'll
no,
never see that
you will
craziness again.
never see it. Like
Yeah.
people don't understand that it's like there was this whole era in Long Island where every show ended when it got shut down by the cops. They
Yeah.
were all illegal shows in illegal venues with no insurance
Well,
and no,
not to sorry to cut you off. Not to
no.
mention, remember the place you guys started, and the
Oh, the
first
pit.
show got the pit. It was
Yeah.
us 25 to life, One for One, New Blood,
Yeah.
No Submission, and it didn't even get to One for One at that point because the cops came. That show was packed. Where
Exactly.
was that again?
Exactly. So like now it's like you think about if you're a kid going to shows in New York now, imagine Webster Hall or Terminal 5 sold out, except it's an illegal show and nobody is supposed to be there. Like
Yeah,
the PWAC is some of the best memories of my life,
me too.
but Deja One was incredible. It was incredibly run. Mark Lopez was amazing. Christian McKnight was
Killed
amazing. Like it was incredibly run and again was just like a catering hall, but like Deja One had a real good run of a lot of shows for a long time. And I mean, I remember me and Mike Musilli went. Christian McKnight booked this band, and it was on a Wednesday night, on a school night, and he had sold like no tickets, and he called me and Mike and was like, "Yo, can you guys come down to the show tonight? This band just came off tour with Slayer, and I thought that like they were gonna do a lot of people because they just came off tour with Slayer,
Fucking
but
System of a
nobody."
Down.
It was System of a Down, and it was
Yeah,
System of a Down on a
yeah.
Wednesday night to no more than 40 people. at Deja
No, it's
One.
right. That was their first, like before they
Yeah,
obviously blew
it
up.
was before even the first major
System
label
of a
record.
Down played Deja One. Like
Yeah.
that's yeah.
And I remember Bouncing Souls did a show there, and they had to add a second show because it was so packed, and so they played twice in a day.
Remember
Deja
the
One.
Sick of It All show was packed.
Yep.
That was a great show. Yeah,
Yep.
that was that. Deja One. PWAC is amazing. Deja One memories wise of like
Yep.
selfishly my band and just being there a lot. Like I love that place. So favorite show you went to in the late '90s, and it's
Oh,
hard to pick one, but
easy. No, no, no. I
what
actually
is
do have
good?
an answer for this. The Sick of It All video shoot. It was the Sick of It All video shoot for Us Versus Them. They had just put out Built to Last, and it was at the Roxy in the city, which is now, I believe, is it now Terminal 5? It's now something. It's one of these big
Okay.
New York City places, but it was the original Roxy in Manhattan, like the old, like, when from was like the Studio 54 era. And the show was AFI, Ensign. It was AFI, Ensign, Snapcase, VOD, Sick of It All. And
Crazy lineup. Love it.
Snapcase was like 2 weeks before putting out Progression Through Unlearning. It was just as Progression was about to come out. VOD had just put out the Green Record, and Sick of It All had just put out Built to Last, and they were filming a video for Us Versus Them. And we got in there early, and we had never heard of AFI. They were on Very Proud of You. They were touring on Very Proud of You. And we watched them play, and we were like, oh my God, this band's amazing. Like, they're so catchy or whatever. And then after they played, Davey Havoc was in the pit for the entire Snapcase set. And this was when he was like super skinny and was wearing like ska, like the checkerboard suspenders, and had this like totally West Coast style of moshing because he was like a Cali skate punk kid and was doing the like windmill, swinging his arms like doing like the Cali style windmill. And I remember just being like, whoa, who is this band? They're so catchy. And then just seeing this dude not leave the pit for the entire Snapcase set. And that was the first time I ever heard AFI and fell in love with them. And Progression Through Unlearning was like my number one hardcore record in that era.
Great
And
record, yeah.
VD Green album. And like, so to me, if you say number one show, that's the one that jumps out at me
That
first as
was
just like, damn, I can't believe that was a bill.
Crazy Bill.
Yeah.
What did you listen to last?
Oh, Viagra Boys, the new Viagra Boys
Okay.
single. They've been one of my favorite bands, and now they are releasing, for anybody that doesn't know, they're from Sweden. They are the most clever acerbic band out there. I love everything they do, but they just started releasing singles from their upcoming album, and so today they put out the second single, and it's incredible. And so all day I've just been listening to the two new Viagra Boys songs.
Cool. A
Yeah.
band, Crime and Stereo now, that you wish you would have played with. Because you played with a lot of bands, a lot of big bands and stuff, but a band you wish you would have played with that you never got to share a stage with.
Rancid is the one that jumps out at me. I would say out of all of my all-time favorite bands, um, Rancid is the only one that we have never shared a stage with. Oh, and Avail. We got to hang out with Avail. We actually stayed at Gwamper, the bass player. We stayed at his house one night on tour, and then the next day he walked us around Richmond and like showed us all of the like different spots where like he took us to like Vine Street and Lombardy Street, and he showed us the Monroe Park where Riot Monroe happened. And so like we never played with Avail, but we did get to hang with them. So I would say Avail and Rancid. We're very lucky. We've played with Lifetime, we've played with Sick of It All, we've played with Silent Majority, we've played with Gorilla Biscuits, we've played with all of our favorite bands. Did I say Bad Religion? We played with Bad Religion. Yeah. Rancid and Avail are the two childhood favorite bands that we never got to play with. So
Chance.
those are my two answers. Yeah.
A band you like that may surprise people, or an
Oh,
artist.
I think if anybody listens to Crime and Stereo, you wouldn't be surprised that we have eclectic tastes. What could I say as an answer to this? That people would surprise people. I'm obsessed with, if you can find this, There's a record by Pat McDonald. Pat McDonald is the singer for Timbuktu.
Okay.
Timbuktu is the band in the 80s that had My Future's So Bright, I Gotta Wear Shades. They were a one-hit wonder band that did that song. The singer's name is Pat McDonald. Pat McDonald has an acoustic record that he did in the late 90s, early 2000s called PM Does DM. And it's this dude doing acoustic Depeche Mode covers, acoustic one-man band Depeche Mode covers with like extremely light production in the background. And it's like the fucking best record in the world. It's like I like some of these renditions of these songs more than the original versions, and I'm a huge Depeche Mode fan. So that PM Does DM by Pat McDonald is really just bananas good. And then I just thought of this while thinking this. The Seu George covers, the Brazilian guy who sings the David Bowie covers in Portuguese
Okay.
in Life Aquatic, the Wes Anderson movie Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou. There is a character in the background, this Brazilian singer who, in the entire movie, he's playing David Bowie covers sung in Portuguese, played on a nylon stringed acoustic guitar. And then he released a record of him doing all those songs. So it's just this guy doing Bowie covers sung in Portuguese
Huh.
on on a classical guitar. And those songs also I like better than some of the original versions. And I would suggest for people, not that this is what I'm listening to currently, but I would recommend for people to check out both of those records. I don't know actually what the correct pronunciation of his name is. It is spelled Seu, and then his last name is Jorge, like Jorge, but I
Okay.
believe George. Um, so Seu George doing David Bowie covers in Portuguese, and Pat McDonald doing Depeche Mode covers solo are the two records that maybe would surprise people, but I think that they will love.
Cool. Playing a show or writing music?
Damn. Forever or for once? If it's like for I get one of these things for the rest of my life, it's definitely writing music. If you're telling me a one-time event, playing a show. Nothing feels as good as ripping a gig. I don't care how old you get, how much of a sad old man you become,
It's
ripping
like
a
I
gig.
appreciate it more now.
Yeah,
It's just yeah, it's the best. There's nothing better.
ripping a gig is the best thing in the world.
So last question here, and then we'll end off. So, well, two part actually to this.
Okay.
Most underrated Long Island hardcore band in the mid to late '90s.
Underrated hardcore band in the mid to late 90s. Millhouse, Obscenity in the Milk.
Yeah.
I think that album, if it came out at any era, could be one of the biggest heavy records of that year. And I still believe that now in 2025. It's like, who's like Knocked Loose is probably like the biggest, heavy band from our scene going right now. It's like, go find a Knocked Loose fan and play them Obscenity in the Milk. Like it'll blow their minds. They'll love that record. So I think that record should have been much bigger. I think the Clockwise EP,
Yeah, that was a good one
the
too.
6 song Clockwise EP with it was called She Was. That should have been super big. And the Motive 7 inch, the 3 song Motive 7 inch. Uh, what was the name of that? I versus the Beckoning Torture something. It was a long name. Highfalutin.
Chris from Sky Came Falling was on, and he mentioned Motive too. Yeah, he
Oh
said,
yeah, the
yeah.
mode. Interesting. I literally saw Chris in the pediatricians
Did you
yesterday.
really?
Yeah, but he lives in the same town, and our kids are both sick at the same time. And I saw him in the
Uh-huh.
pediatrician lobby yesterday. Yes, the 3 song Motive 7 inch, the Clockwise 6 song EP. Oh no, I'm sorry. The correct answer to this question is the Blood Red EP. That is the most underrated. Yeah, I know you asked band. I'm giving you albums. That's kind of more how
Fun.
my
hmm
brain works.
hmm
The Blood Red 5 song Redwood Records EP is the greatest, most underrated Long Island hardcore record ever. For anybody listening that doesn't know, Blood Red was the singer from Silent Majority and 3 of the musicians from the band Inside. Right
hmm
after Inside and Silent Majority broke up, the guitar player for Inside is the younger brother of the singer of Silent Majority. and they did a band right afterwards called Blood Red, and their first 5-song EP that is called the Redwoods Record EP is the most underrated Long Island hardcore record ever.
Hmm. So last part, I guess I was going to ask underrated Long Island hardcore bands now, but how about new bands that you like right now on Long Island? On Long Island.
Oh, I love all the bands of right now. Standstill is amazing, and Family Dinner is amazing, and Inner Love is amazing, and all the whole like scene of emo bands, Moose Creek Park and
Mhm.
Oolong, and all those bands are great. Dead Last and um, Heads Will Roll is really good. I'm trying like now I feel on the spot. I'm kind of racking my brain to think of all the new bands. I mean, there's the whole crop of like the big new bands, Pain of Truth and Koyo, and Sanction. Those bands are all awesome. Um, I wish that I had better immediate recall. I will say, like the kids these days, man, like they got it, like do you remember from the 90s, man, like dude, giant bands could not play their instruments. It's like these bands, like you go back and listen to some of those records that were huge and you're like, oh, these guys could barely play their instruments, and you go see the kids now and they fucking shred. Like all
Yeah.
these kids rip every instrument. They're all very good, and honestly, like, listen, Long Island has always killed it. Like Long Island puts out great.
Always.
It's
And
what
all different kinds of music. Like, so just think of all the
exactly.
bands that you just from the mid '90s even to the era that we're in now, all different styles, and always kills it, and
Yep.
is one of the most influential scenes. And
Yeah.
for argue, you could argue that honestly. And now what's great, what's going on, and I've said this in podcasts, when I've been on them, is you see the brotherhood with all these bands. I had Jay from Last Laugh on. They're another good one, and they're all boys, they're all friends, they all support one another, whether they're super heavy or then they have the other style, like the emo style or the
Yep.
post hardcore. It's great, it's fun to be part of that again.
And I love that these kids are invested in the history, that like they all came out to the Inside reunions, they come out to all of these Silent Majority reunions, like these kids all go nuts for Indecision. I see Neglect shirts
Hmm.
everywhere. These kids rep Neglect, and I think Long Island has a good history of bands passing on the heritage and passing on the lineage. And so they had a whole generation of, Backtrack and Incendiary, kind of passing the torch, with the bands that they came up on. And now you see the Pain of Truth, dudes, and the Koyo dudes and all of them. Um, and so I do think that is a well preserved part of like Long Island's heritage of like getting the kids into. I remember like when I got into shows and the Silent Majority dudes would be talking about, crumb suckers or whatever,
Hmm.
or how much Silent Majority in their day were always hyping up Mind Over Matter. And they were
Right.
like, "Oh, if you like us, like you got to find out about Mind Over Matter." And I do think that that's just like a good part of I mean, and like I'm sure that's true of every scene, but Long Island has a rich history, a substantive history of like, I mean, how many fucking awesome bands have we put out?
Exactly. And look, it's still strong. It's
Yeah.
stronger than ever, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
Alex, man, thanks. Appreciate having
Yeah,
you
dude.
on.
Yeah.
Hang tight. I'm just going to wrap us up and then we'll finish off. Thank you for listening to the What Lies Ahead podcast, which is available on all streaming platforms. Go save the What Lies Ahead podcast playlist on Spotify that features all bands that were on the show. For more information on future episodes, you can go to my Instagram account and follow us at What Lies Ahead _podcast, and on Facebook by searching What Lies Ahead podcast. See you on the next episode.